want to welcome you into the Lootpress studios. You're watching the Lootpress Sports Lowdown. I'm your host, Tyler Jackson, the sports editor from Lootpress, joined as always by sports writer from Lootpress, Rusty Udy. Rusty, how are you doing today?
Doing good. I guess we're full-fledged into basketball and wrestling season now. It's winter sports on tap.
Yeah, I think it was 2 years ago or so, I was sitting beside Tim Stevens from the Huntington Herald-Dispatch after Huntington lost a semifinal game to somebody. And he was like, "Oh, well, on the baseball season." And that's kind of where we are. Our football team's lost, and obviously a lot of the state championship coverage this week. But for the most part, we've started to dive into basketball season. But before we go ahead and get into that, we want to go ahead and recap the two semifinal games that we did have. Both our remaining teams, Independence went on the road and lost 42-7 to Roane County. And Princeton lost, I think, 35-12 to Herbert Hoover. Both tough losses. I was a little bit surprised by the final scores, and the first one I want to start off with is the one that we were covering that night, and that was Princeton Herbert Hoover. I had that one. We talked about it last week. We thought that defending the run would probably come back to bite Princeton, and I think that this loss was just kind of a reflection of everything. It finally caught up to them. I think they had 10 penalties or so for 90-ish yards, and they just came at back-breaking spots. On Princeton's first drive, they're in a 3rd and 20 situation because a penalty puts them back, and they get a 17-yard gain. So then they get a 4th and 3. Well, then you get a penalty on the dead ball. So now it's moved back to 4th and 8. So your offense doesn't even stay on the field, which they plan to go for it. And then another penalty. They just they kept going. And they had a chance they scored to make it, I think it was 21-12. And after the touchdown, there was an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty called. So then the 2-point attempt gets moved back out to the 18. So they end up trying to kick the PAT, and it gets partially blocked. And it was just kind of one of those things where they just never shored it up. And and also a lot of credit to Herbert Hoover. They just ran it down their throat. And when they came into Princeton's house and they physically dominated them. They did. It's really one of the things that in football, it's kind of, I don't want to say embarrassing, but it in a lot of senses it really challenges you. It's a bitter pill to swallow whenever a team comes into your house in the freezing cold and they just run it down your throat, and you know exactly what they're going to do, and they just do it over and over and over again. And, obviously, it's a very good season to get to the semifinals. I think if you told Princeton's community 55 weeks ago that they'd be playing in the 2024 semifinals, they'd be over the moon about it because that's not a place that they'd ever been before.
Right.
But just this game in general, it's I thought there was a lot of Princeton's worst qualities kind of catching up to them. The offense started slow. They had, I think, 48 yards of total offense in the first half, which that's not going to cut it in the semifinal game. They only scored 12 points, and I don't think that. I think if they had scored 12 points in every game this year, that probably would have won them 2 games, maybe the Greenbrier East game, and I think the other one may have been like Hampshire or something like that, and the Beckley game too. But you're just in the playoffs. You're probably not going to win a ton scoring 12 points, especially with the way their defense has been playing, and it's a tough result. But that's it. It just kind of felt like everything finally caught up to them.
Yeah, I think for them to have been successful, their offense needed to be productive. And honestly, I thought their offense would be productive. That wasn't one of the parts I was kind of concerned with. The penalties and could they stop Hoover's running game was kind of the issues. And, there's a lot of reasons we harp on these things throughout the years. We're not geniuses by any means, but we watch enough football to see, there's certain things that's going to cause you to lose, and penalties is a huge thing. And I guess outside of what maybe the Raiders, historically nobody's been able to overcome that kind of stuff. It just beats you, when you beat yourself. And credit to Hoover for a heck of a season. I really thought they'd have a good year, but I didn't see them in the finals, and so a lot of kudos to them. That's really impressive. And Dane Hatfield is just a flat out beast, man. He's just tough. And outside of the kid from Martinsburg, I think he'd probably have this Kennedy thing locked up. But the kid from Martinsburg's had a crazy year too. So it's unfortunate they're both in the same class, in the same year. But a lot of credit to Princeton. A great season, and I just felt like their offense would put a better foot forward than they did. And ultimately, even with the mistakes, if their offense had kind of been their typical offense, they might have been okay.
Yeah, it's honestly, if it was going to happen, this is probably a good year for it to happen because you bring back starting quarterback, receiver, your 2 defensive ends, and a really good offensive lineman. You bring back a core that will make you a contender regardless of the year. But it's probably good that if it was going to happen, then it happens now because nobody really expected Hoover to be in this point. So for Hoover to come in and 3 scores in my book is a blowout. They blew you out on your home field.
Right.
That's
especially in the playoffs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you 3 scores in the playoffs, especially. Yep. But yeah, for them to come into your house and in the cold and basically just they blew you out. That's a tough pill to swallow. But that's one of those things that you can look at and you can improve upon it. Okay, like we got physically manhandled in that game. They did exactly what they wanted to do, and we couldn't stop them. It wasn't like it was just drop back passing game and do all these different things. It was run right to the same area with the same exact player. Hoover has, I think Blake Fisher's the first team All-State player, and he maybe touched the ball 4 times or so. And Joey Fields is basically like Occam's razor. Sometimes the simplest solution is the easiest solution is the simplest one, and that's the one they just kept pushing that button, and Princeton never could stop it until they finally moved Caleb Kaiser back to the defensive line. But it's just one of those things where you look at it, and if you're a player, you get in the weight room, you want to improve in the off season to avoid this happening. Because even if you look around the landscape of AAA, Fairmont Senior, I think, graduates 24 seniors, I think is what I saw on their boosters page. Nitro graduates a lot of players. Herbert Hoover obviously will graduate Dane, who's been just a really good player in that program. Bridgeport will graduate some players, but it doesn't matter because Bridgeport always has a good system. Their JV team's really good. They just keep cycling them in and out. They've always done that. But that's basically what you're going to be chasing because I do think Bridgeport's going to win. I think they're going to come in next year as a heavy favorite again. You got to be able to stop the run and you got to be able to get strong, and that's kind of the issue we've talked about with Bluefield in years past too. Is being able to stop the run, do those different things, and I think that if you're Princeton and you lose this type of way, that shows you exactly what you need to do if you want to be back and compete for a state championship because the window's still open, but after next year's group, I think it closes. It's extremely hard to compete in this sort of AAA. And I know at the feeder level last year, I think their middle school team went winless, and I think they got back on track this year. But it is extremely hard to maintain that sort of success, especially in the metro area like Princeton. You're not in Clarksburg or Fairmont where you can draw all sorts of different kids from different areas. You're trying to draw from Mercer County, and there's just not a ton of that. And, even the kids that Princeton has, most of them are homegrown. Kaiser came over, and so did Neely from Pikeview. But Jennings, he may have came over from Graham, but he was a Princeton kid. He played in middle school there. So this is your opportunity. This is your window of opportunity. And I think that if you don't capitalize on it next year, it slams shut. So you got to do what you have to do this offseason to make sure that you're at Laley Field next year holding that trophy.
Yeah, and we've talked about it for years, and we kind of joke about 7-on-7 competitions and different ththings like that. But football's won in the trenches. You got to have the bigger horses to move the other horses, and if you don't, you're going to kind of get made look bad like Princeton did. Because Hoover was moving them pretty easy. So it's it's a good building tool, like you're saying, and even can build down into the middle schools and stuff like that when you can impress on kids. Look, if you want to play at the elite level, you got to start now. You got to start working out now, get stronger now, and get build up through the years. And I think we're seeing that with Independence. They're buying in all the way down into the the Pee Wee football or whatever you want to call it. Those kids are all buying into that program and the fact that they know they have to get stronger and things like that. Because that's basically football is man on man. Who's stronger than the other guy?
Yeah, and segue, and that's a perfect one. We're going to go into Independence, and they went up to Rome County and they lost. And Roane County moved the ball at will. A lot of credit to them. And this has been a couple of years coming from Roane. We've talked about it last week, but Independence has had their number the last couple of years. And Roane finally gets over that hump. But I got to watch a little bit of that game at halftime. And they loaded the box. They just kind of ran at them. The Watson kid, the running back, like he's legit. I don't know if he'll win the Warner Award, but he's right there in that conversation. Over 2,000 yards rushing. They just could not stop them. And I think a lot of that is to be expected. They're a bigger, they're a more seasoned team. Independence, for all the talent they have, they are really young. They're going to bring back most of those kids. They don't graduate a ton, but the window of opportunity is wide open for Independence. If you're going to get them, I think this was the year to do it because we're talking about potentially building the dynasty as soon as next year. as long as they keep all their kids together and they keep them healthy. Because as good as they feel about the freshmen that came in this year, they feel good about the freshmen that are coming in next year. So you got the quarterback back, you have Silas Nelson back, you have most of the offensive linemen back, and it's just that you have their top receiver back, Christian Linksweiler. They are set up for success as long as, again, they stay healthy and they stay together. This is you're talking about a team that's has a chance to really run Double-A for the next couple of years.
No doubt. I think that game was just kind of a culmination of just the year. Independence played a brutal schedule all year, and that beats you up physically and mentally to start with. And everything that's gone on, it's been documented. There were issues there, but Roan kind of had enough of Independence. Independence had kind of stung them a couple times, and they felt like they had good teams, and Independence was who knocked them out. So there was that factor for those seniors. They knew what it was like to lose to Independence. They didn't want to go out losing to Independence. So I think it was just a setup that was really difficult for Independence to win that game. I did think it would be a little closer. I was surprised they kind of ran on them like that, but I think it gets to a point eventually. Mentally you just get tired, and I'm not making excuses for Independence. That's just the way it is. In football and with life. It just unfortunately didn't go their way this year in some things, and for them to have weathered what they did, make it to the semifinals, that's an incredible year, absolutely incredible year. So a lot of kudos to those kids and the seniors that were there that kind of helped carry that through. But you're right. I think the next 3 or 4 years, it could be something special over there.
Yeah, and then on that note of fatigue, you go back to it. They're a program that they've done summer ball and spring ball a lot, so they probably start some stuff back in July, and then you get going in August, and then September, and in October, and November, and you're into December. You're talking about 5 months for 15 to 16-year-old kids, and it's, being a younger team. But yeah, it's I can see all the fatigue and everything caught up. But again, another good year. I think that once they lost starting offensive lineman who would have been an all-stater, Alex Blankenship, to injury, they're kind of playing with house money, and you make a run to the semifinals again, a year ahead of schedule, I think. So yeah, and obviously a lot of this is dependent on what happens with the classifications. We're still in flux with that with football.
Right.
The Spring Valley proposal needs to be voted on and passed. I believe it's going to be later this month, and there's some doubt whether or not that happens. But I do think that if they're in Double-A, they probably come into next year as the favorites. AAA will be extremely difficult, but I wouldn't put it past them to come in as if they are in AAA, to come in as one of the top competitors. Just think about all the turnover there and the kids they do have coming back. So growth isn't linear, but if they can follow that track, they got a job. They got a chance to compete in either class.
Yep. Overall, good year in football. We had quite a few teams make the playoffs, 2 make semifinals. So you gotta be impressed with that. So over how you've talked about before, how when we all first started this, that we were told football wasn't going to be very good, and our football has been actually really good and has a good future.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to take this chance to go ahead and announce our Player of the Year awards for our banquet. Starting off with Boys Soccer Player of the Year, Kobe Dillon from Beckley. Our Girls Soccer Player of the Year, Ryan White from Greenbrier East. Volleyball Player of the Year, Abby Dillon, the older sister to Kobe Dillon. Female Golfer of the Year, Maggie Asbury from Liberty. Male Golfer of the Year, by a hair, Tyler Beard from Shady Spring. The Male Cross Country Runner of the Year, Johnny Walkup from Nicholas County. Female Cross Country Runner of the Year, Avery Lilly from Summers County. And some of our other awards, the Audie Award, Mary Audie Award, which talks about a kid's character and their resilience and perseverance and different things like that, goes to Presley Treadway from Greenbrier West. Community Choice, which is the top vote getters from our Player of the Week's poll. Tyson Atkins from Summers County and in the Kanawha Valley. Blake Fisher from Herbert Hoover. And our football awards, the Quarterback of the Year, Chance Barker from Princeton. Offensive Player, I'll save Offensive Player for a second. Offensive Lineman of the Year, Brady Baker from James Monroe. Defensive Player of the Year, Caleb Kaiser from Princeton. The Wide Receiver of the Year, Brad Mosser from Princeton. And the Offensive Player of the Year. This was a tough one. There were a lot of good players in the conversation here. But Silas Nelson from Independence, I think that everything kind of combined, he kind of stood out there. Schedule, we take it all into account. And then the Kanawha Valley Offensive Player of the Year, we actually had co-players in Dane Hatfield from Herbert Hoover and Noah Valdami from Hurricane. Obviously, Dane winning that semifinal helps a lot, but I don't think it should undo all the progress that Noah had throughout the year. And last but not least, our Coach of the Year. We usually give this to a football coach, but we deviated, and I think that it was the right call. It's Steve Larabelle from Beckley. Congratulations to all those winners. But yeah, it was it was a really tough year. I think for the football awards, there were a ton of kids, in each award outside of maybe wide receiver of the year that you could make a case for them to have won.
Yeah, I think that was the thing that struck me was, typically throughout the year, we've kind of got, well, it's pretty much this kid, this kid, this kid. It wasn't quite like that this year. I mean, we really had to kind of analyze some stuff and kind of bounce it back and forth. And there was every award had multiple kids that you can make a case for, and that's fun. It's good to see. We've had the good fortune this year of 3 state champions in the fall sports, which is. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and look, but just off the top of your head, you don't see that very often.
Yeah, I don't think it's happened for this.
Yeah, so that's impressive in its own right. So and that whole list of kids, and we could make probably 2 or 3 more lists of the same positions of really good athletes we've had this fall. So it's been a fun time covering them. It's been a fun time watching them, and it's always fun when they win state titles. That's always I guess the cherry on top of the sundae.
Absolutely. We're going to go, we talked about it last week, but we will go ahead and preview. We're going to do the girls this week, and then next week we'll move into the boys a little bit more. We'll have the boys preview coming out on Tuesday, December 10th. Yeah, December 10th. By the time you guys are watching this, they'll probably be out in the morning. They'll be right before the games tip off, so you'll have that to look forward to. But, I want to kind of go by class. In Class A on the girls' side, we have Mount View, Riverview, Meadow Bridge, Greater Beckley, Greenbrier West, and Montcalm locally. And, I think the two that kind of stand out to me are Greenbrier West and Riverview as far as, the expectations for this season. Greenbrier West is, they might be a little bit behind the start because of volleyball and the focus on that. Right. But they bring back a lot of kids. You talk about it, they're probably motivated to, after missing out in the state tournament last year. Presley Treadway scored 46 points in a losing effort in the regional. And Riverview brings back some key players. I can't remember the name of the kid particularly, but there's one that's a sophomore this year that they feel like is going to be maybe the best player in school history.
Like a chip girl?
I do believe so, yeah.
Kaylee?
Yeah, they were pretty high on her. But, those are the two that I think have a chance to make the most noise. And Greater Beckley has some good young pieces too. So, Class A should be competitive, and it's going to be kind of crazy trying to keep up with who's in what class. It's a little bit different than football this year.
Yeah, I've had to kind of put my mind and just push it back into volleyball mode because it's fairly similar to volleyball as to where, everybody's going to fall. But, I don't think it's out of the question that Greenbrier West could make a run, for a state championship. They could get down there if if their pieces fall together like they should. You just never know with injuries and different things like that. But, Presley's just unbelievable. That 46 points in the regional was no joke. And, it wasn't like, she caught Riverview by surprise. They were guarding her and trying to stop her, and she was just basically unstoppable. It's just Riverview was able to match what, she could put up, they had 2 or 3 girls that were, putting up numbers. So I think Riverview has a really good chance of, once that system they're running now where they're running so many kids in and out, once that, it seemed like last year when you watched them at the beginning, you're like, well, I don't know if this is going to work. It looks a little funny, but by the time postseason rolled around, they were all clicking in that system. So I think it's going to be the same thing this year. I think they're not only the favorites in Region 3, but maybe head and shoulders, above the others, but, we've seen crazier things happen in basketball, so nothing's a given by any chance. But I think those two are definitely really, really good this year.
Absolutely. On the Class AA, Bluefield West. I think I ended up with almost all the AA stories. Right. Bluefield West Side, Summers County, James Monroe, Wyoming East, Midland Trail, and Liberty. The ones that stand out to me are obviously Summers County, James Monroe, Wyoming East. So I want to go ahead and start with those 3. Summers County, they bring back a couple of kids that were part of the team that finished state runner-up 2 years ago, and Avery Lilly and Abby Persinger. So they, they're going to lean obviously on defense. They're trying to make sure that they have their offense together and skill wise. But this is a tough competitive region. I look down at some of the other teams, Wyoming East and James Monroe. I come in thinking that those are the two that are the favorite to lead the region. But again, once you get there, you never know what's going to happen. You don't have the built-in luxury of a sectional loss this year with the way that everything's been reformatted, sectional tournaments out the window.
Yep.
But I come in thinking talent-wise, Wyoming East and James Monroe are probably a little bit head and shoulders above everyone else. You got to see Wyoming East in their season opener, and it looked a little bit rough. But first game or so can look that way. But they have to go and try to replace Maddie Clark, who is the most accomplished athlete in school history,
right.
Regardless of boys or girls, and that's saying a lot considering what all who else come through that school in all sports: golf, boys basketball, football. Right. She kind of stands above everyone else. That's a tall task, but they have some good kids and they have the ability to do it. So what did you kind of see in your first look at them?
Well, first of all, it was a tough game to start with. Because Pikeview is good, and Pikeview is a very physical team. They don't back up on you, and it did become, more of a, it wasn't, I'm not implying it's dirty, but it was a physical game, and that game may be a tough one for Wyoming East to stomach right now. With the leadership issues they have, trying to find a replacement for Maddie, because that's the one thing I think I pointed out to you when we talked about it was, is who's going to be able to step into Maddie's roles. Not all the time, but in the tough times, because Maddie was gritty. And, she didn't get real vocal and real animated, but you could see a look of determination in her face when things got rough, that she was going to get the job done. She was going to lead her team to the finish line. And I think that's the thing that they're searching for right now. And that's understandable, because they've had big-time leaders before. I mean, before Maddie, it's Sky Davidson. And, you can't get a much better leader than her.
Yeah.
So, that's the thing that, you're asking kids to step into a big, big role for that program. And, it'll take a little time. I think they might be a little up and down early in the year. Schedule's tough.
Yeah.
And when you're struggling to find, that position, it can get a little ugly at times. And so it's going to be a deal of how well can they stay together and how well can they work together. Are they going to work together through the tough times? Are they going to snipe at each other in the tough times? How's the chemistry going to be? And that's not just them, that's all teams, especially in December. And I think the teams that weather that and come out better for it in January are the teams that do well in the postseason. This part up here determines, how you're going to slop through the mud and fight through it, or you're just going to quit.
Yeah, and it's extremely tough too for Wyoming East, because I know you don't want to look at state tournament seeding already, especially when you just tipped off your first team, but. The fact of the matter is they have the other two of the other three semifinalists on their schedule. They play Wheeling Central, I think, on Saturday. Yep. That's a team that is pegged as probably one of the top 2 or 3 in AA, and chance to win the state championship. And they have Williamstown early in January, and those games are going to carry a lot of weight when it comes to seeding these teams at the end of the year. They're going to look at the heads-to-heads, and there's also when February is different than January or December. But it's going to carry some weight, and you got to find a way to try to weather those and be competitive, and maybe even win those games early. But the schedule, it's tough. You talked about Pikeview, then they have Kaiser, and then Wheeling Central. Those are 3 state tournament teams, 2 of them from AAA, and it's extremely tough. And most of the schedule is very front loaded, but also in the back end you have your matchups with Summers County and James Monroe.
Right.
So it is very competitive, and it's a tough spot to be in, replacing a kid like Maddie Clark. But they're going to have to find a way to try to weather it early.
Yeah, those are special kids.
Yeah.
They really are special kids. And, you just don't, plug another person into that position, especially when they haven't really had to do that. They're learning just as much as, the rest of the team's learning. Well, they're learning how to lead, too, at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And James Monroe, they bump up from single A to AA, and they lose a really good all-state point guard in Mary Beth Meadows, but they. The kids they have coming back, Maggie Borowski was the first-team All-Stater in Single A last year, and then the kid that I might be the highest on is probably Maya Dunlap. She's basically 5'11", 6 foot as a point guard. last year, and she can shoot it, she can handle it. They pressure you well. They have a lot of size and length, and they competed with St. Albans this past weekend. They lost by 6 at the shootout at Capital Midland. So they got a chance to be special, and they're going to give some teams, I think, some issues. But they're really another one that I had pegged. I don't think they came in top 10 at all in the coaches poll, and I kind of think that's a big miss, because I think at worst, they're probably the 5th best team in Double A. I think if they play an A game, who knows? It could be even more. But I think that they're really good. I think a lot of people are sleeping on them.
Yeah. I hope they can get it good enough to get out of that 4 or 5 game.
Yeah.
State tournament.
See, that's gonna be the issue. I don't know that they will, because I really think
it's gonna be hard.
Yeah, unless they beat Wyoming East. My projection is I think that the top 3 seeds in some capacity are probably going to be East, Williamstown, and Wheeling Central, or if St. Mary's beats one of those teams from up north.
Right.
So yeah, it's going to be extremely tough. But the one I kind of look at and ask you about is Midland Trail, because they lost a kid, Addie Isaacs, who she got hurt last year, and that kind of derailed their season. But now she's at Oak Hill, so a much different outlook for them than what they had hoped.
Yeah, and they have a lot of experienced kids. When Addie went down last year and got hurt and didn't play, they started out really good. She gets hurt. Then they really struggled after that. And, all those kids that had to kind of be forced into action are the kids that are back now. So they're much more experienced. I still think it's going to be the same kind of deal a little bit. Scoring the basketball might be a little bit of an issue for them. Playing hard will not be an issue for them. They all play really hard. They play good defense. So they do have that to kind of hang their hat on. But I think that's the key with a lot of these teams. James Monroe plays really good defense. Wyoming East plays really good defense. It's just who can do it on the offensive end, who can get the ball in the basket a little bit. And some of that's comes off of your defense, but you still have to kind of be able to score in the half court set too.
Absolutely. We're going to move on to AAA, because this one's really interesting. Locally, our region in AAA has 9 teams. And I think there's another one throughout the state that only has 5 teams, and a lot of coaches have complained about that on the girls and the boys side.
Almost every AAA coach I've talked to mentions how we get 9.
Yeah. I have to go back and look at the breakdown entirely, but I imagine it's a lot of geographical common sense, but it's tough.
The ones they point to a lot, of course, Hoover's in this area in volleyball, has been for a while, but
even in basketball the last couple of years,
and teams like that, that maybe those 2 or 3 could have moved somewhere else, So, but it is what it is.
And I know Greenbrier East came in as I think number 4, number 5 in the coaches poll, but they hosted Nitro, and they shut them out in the 3rd quarter, beat them pretty convincingly. That's the defending state champion. And I know Nitro got some good kids in, and they returned almost all the kids from that state championship team a year ago. But for Greenbrier East, you have some legit title aspirations. Now, Nitro might be the defending state champions, but there is a lot of talent in Wayne as well. We've talked about that. I think the last 2 years they've come in probably as a title favorite, and kind of floundered out a little bit. Honestly, they fallen below expectations, and Nitro was one of those teams that I think lost to them by 20 or so in the regular season. They came back and beat them in the state tournament. They know how to win. They know how to do it whenever they're up there. So I don't take too much stock in December. Like we talked about, first game of the year, there's different for everybody. Right. But for Greenbrier East, it's probably that shows you, hey, like we're exactly where we want to be, to start the season. We knocked off the defending state champs. It's just not getting too complacent and falling in love with that result and realizing, March is a long way away, and you still got to keep building on that. But that's a really solid opening win for them.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times what's hurt Greenbrier East in the past is people have looked at their schedule and not looked at it very favorably. And when you win games like this, that does carry some weight in March when we start talking about seedings and different things like that. Because the governor does get a bad rap sometimes, with from the other coaches as far as seeding and stuff goes. So anything you can do to improve that really helps. But we felt like Greenbrier East was going to be good coming into this year. And the thing that really kind of struck me in that game was the balanced scoring that they had in that game. And a couple of their better players struggled a little bit, and you figure Nitro's coming in, trying to put the clamps on them, which I think that was a little bit of their struggle last year, was when, Kennedy or Ava, struggled just a little bit, because of the defenses that were put on them. The others were learning how to step it up. And, I know McKenna McClure had 10 points in the first half, when the others were struggling and they were trying to put the clamps on them. So that actually put Greenbrier East in a pretty good spot going into halftime. So I think they have some pieces around them that, maybe not they're household names to us, but they're not maybe household names across the state that are going to be some big time players for them. Hannah Fuller, she's about 6'3", 6'4".
A legit,
legit big center, and she can play. And, actually, Coach Justice, what he said was her best traits are passing. When you have a big.
You can pass out the post to those shooters.
Exactly, yeah. So, I think they have the components this year, and I do think they have a little bit of depth. Alexa Stack is back playing. Everybody should know her name from volleyball. She's going to Concord to play volleyball. She's actually a really good basketball player too. It's just that, she's spent most of her time in volleyball, especially travel volleyball during the off season, but she's back, and that's just that much more depth. She's fast. She knows how to play. She can handle the basketball. So,
I think she's played some travel basketball too.
Exactly. That's a good team.
Yeah.
Some really good. I mean,
so
I think she played in Borowski.
So it's not like she's not touched a basketball in 3 years.
Right.
She's still played,
right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they've got the components, and, I think they may be a little under the radar in a way. I mean, even though they made state tournament last year, but I think they got a pretty good shot of doing something special.
Absolutely, and it really is interesting because they're just a very well distributed team. I think Kennedy is probably the big name on there for most, but we talked about McKenna. We covered her sister. Waller Girl was a really good guard too. Ava was a really good player as a freshman last year. So they're the team that I genuinely think they have 4 or 5 kids that this kid could give us 15 tonight, and you wouldn't be surprised. And I think that's absolutely what they're going to need if they want to win the state championship. Some of the other teams, obviously, Shady Spring, taking over there is Tracy Raven. She's trying to rebuild that program. Pikeview comes in, they return a lot of kids, and they got Jocelyn Hall back, who tore her ACL in the first game last year, and she was going to be their starting guard. They're 1-2 right now. They had the close game with Wyoming East, and then they went to Wheeling Central, and I think they lost by 30. And to me, that was always going to be tough. You're playing that game against Wyoming East and hitting the road all the way up, 3-hour drive up to Fairmont Senior.
Yeah, that was a tough game against Wyoming East. It was a grinder, and when he said he was playing Wheeling Central the next day, I was like, "Ooh,
yeah,
that's rough." So,
that's the same thing I thought. But they have a lot of kids back. They graduated some starters, but Jocelyn Hall, Jalen Shrewsbury, Karis Trump transferred over because Mercer Christian had a split. So whenever you see, I think it's Summit, and I can't remember what the other one is. Maranatha. Yeah, Maranatha and Summit. So those 2 schools are a split of Mercer Christian. But Karis Trump she played at Mercer Christian, was a good player. Now she's at Pikeview. She came over so she could play soccer too. So she's there. But they have 3 or 4 kids that, and Haley Justice too is another one, the big 6'3" kid. And, that can give you a double-double, can give you 15, 20 points. Isn't probably going to be your consistent go-to scorer, but can do that. And, of course, Riley Meadows.
Right.
So they have a lot of the pieces there. But, again, this entire region, we're talking about some of the local teams like Greenbrier East and Pikeview, and Princeton likes a team that they have with some young kids.
Yep.
But you go on the other side, and there's Sissonville still over there, and they have really
Sissonville scrimmaged Greenbrier East, and that was a nail-biter to the end. So.
Yeah.
Sissonville's very good,
and they're 2 years removed. They were the team that beat Wayne in the the quarterfinals 2 years ago, and then they missed last year because of the close game against Pikeview. But there's some good teams on the other side as well.
That's a rough one, and that's another one where seeding's going to matter. Where you play these games, it's going to be tough because let's say you're Pikeview and have to go to Sissonville. I mean, that's just not like a 1-hour drive. I mean, that's up the roadways, and it's tough to win in those places.
Yeah, this has kind of changed everything. I talked to the boys coach, Sean Jenkins at Independence, and he always had the philosophy, I have 22 practice games, and he's like, that kind of changes for me now because you really have to think about seeding.
Right.
Like you want to be one of those top 2 seeds because you don't have the grace of losing a sectional championship and all right, we live to play another day.
Yeah.
That's it's all gone. So it's really, really tough. Like you're trying to aim for one of those top 3 seeds and make things as favorable as possible.
And that's a crazy. What I've noticed in volleyball a lot is that's when it's scattered like that. Everybody has to travel the turnpike, and anybody's traveled the turnpike knows that that's just a crapshoot. You just don't know what you're going to get. You could be going to the game and sit on the interstate for an hour and a half or 2 hours, and then go have to try to play a game and stuff like that. So, that's the other sidebar to this spread out region. If we were all down here together, it's not that big a deal. But when you bring the turnpike into consideration, who knows? The other night I sat on the interstate right in the volleyball store.
Yeah.
Because I was stuck in traffic. So, I don't know. I just think it's, I've always been a proponent of neutral courts in the postseason. I still think it's the best way to go. I kind of wish they would do it here because I just think it's a better situation. We watched the Independence West Side game last year, and that got a little edgy. It was packed, it was tight, you couldn't move around in there very well. And then once everybody spills out on the floor after the game's over with, it's just not a good situation. And, if you get somewhere like the Armory or something like that where people are back off the floor a little bit, sure, there's jaw and there's finger point and that kind of stuff, but they're apart. And they just can't readily walk out on the floor and get into confrontations with each other.
Absolutely. The other team that kind of sticks out, well, I've got a couple other ones, Independence, Nicholas County. They have good players. Nicholas County has Adrian Truman. She's been there. She started 3 or 4 years now, 1,000-point score.
Yep.
And then Independence brings back 2 kids that scored a lot of points. And again, you want to stay out of that bottom seed. What steps forward can these programs take this year? This is, I think, for Independence in particular. They finished 19-4 last year. But the truth was, it was against a cupcake schedule, and there were a lot of wins against teams like Van in there. And you have to build confidence with winning.
Right.
But then you get into the situation where you did with the sectional championship, or not sectional championship, but the sectional opener with the controversy and all that. And you lose to West Side, and I know that leaves a bad taste in your mouth, just the way kind of all that went out. So can you take that next step forward? You're talking about your top scorers are a junior and a sophomore now. They played enough, they scored enough. Can you make some noise in that region?
Yep. I think the other pieces around him got to come up big, and not scoring wise. I think the scoring's fine, but they've got to be able to do the little things, that helps teams win. And then they'll probably in that group, won't be a team that's considered as a favorite to get to that, to the state tournament, but they definitely could have the talent to do it.
Absolutely. And then last but not least, Quad A, we have Beckley and Oak Hill. I want to start with you because you did the Oak Hill preview. But they have quite a few kids back, and I know the last couple of years they ended pretty rough. They had Princeton, and it wasn't very competitive. In that sectional opener, and they lost. But we talked about it. They have Addie Isaacs. They have I think Tasia Gray's the guard that's back.
Exactly.
They have a lot of kids that are back, and Quad A's tough, but when you have that experience and you bring in an experienced player like Isaacs, it's going to help your program a lot.
Yeah. The problem for them has been scoring. There's no doubt about it. They play great defense. They have played great defense for the last few years. They hold teams to about 45 points, but they're only averaging 49 on their side. And, that's just not being able to get it done against the big teams. And Coach Compton thinks, that they have a much better scoring offense this year. They did lose Kara Smith, who's a double-double player for them, but they have a couple girls inside that, I think will fill those shoes a little bit. The Craddock girl was a really good volleyball player at the net. She was a force. She's tall. She has good pedigree. That's a athletic family. So I think she's going to be maybe a surprise player for them this year. But as long as Addie can stay healthy and play like she can, Her and Tasia have always played travel ball together, so they're very familiar with each other. They have some other really good players. Kirsten Fazell, really good soccer players, also a good basketball player. Jada Wilburn, good basketball player, good soccer player. And I noticed, of course, the first game was against Mountain View, which, you feel like they're kind of overmatching Mountain View a little bit, but all of them scored well in that game. So I think they play Hurricane, I believe, Saturday, and I think we might get a better feel of what this team's got there. Even though it's a long ways to go, you kind of feel like that game they should be competitive and possibly win that game.
Absolutely, and then last but not least, Beckley. Beckley had a really rough year last year, but the reinforcements are back. Abby Dillon is back out to play this year. She last played her sophomore year, as is Maya Wooten. So they have some really good players. You factor in those two along with Josie Cross. All these kids were part of that state tournament team 2 years ago. Maya and Abby didn't play last year. They are out now. I think Maya just committed to go play soccer at Marshall. It just kind of tells you what kind of athlete that she is. And obviously we talked about Abby, our volleyball player of the year, but she's also a really good guard. Really talented, has started since her freshman year. And they have some other key contributors that they expect. Danya Burton is another big one.
Yep.
She really allows them to space the floor, can handle the ball a little bit. She's probably 5'10", 5'11",
Yep.
and she came back late in the year last year. They're dealing with some injuries right now, but really those four, Dillon, Wooten, Burton, and Cross, a really good core to bring back, and they give you a shot to come back and compete for the state tournament spot. And then he mentioned the freshman too, Chloe Williams. I think she was a part of, she was a middle school player last year, but he mentioned that she was a legit 6'1". We'll see some time for them.
Yep.
So I think that's pretty important. But for Beckley, it's quite a contrast. Going into last year, there wasn't a ton of reason to be optimistic with a lot of the kids that they had ended up losing.
Right.
But now they bring almost all those kids back, and you look around at the region, and they've got a legit shot of making some noise and getting back to Charleston. I don't know how high the ceiling is because Wheeling Park and Morgantown are still really good and bring back some powerhouse players.
Scary.
But we've seen some weird things happen in March. Don't put it past anybody. But I think it's a good start that you have that much talent out. It's a breath of fresh air, I think, in regards to last year where everything was just such a struggle because you were trying to find somebody that could play guard for you. Josie, for example, was a post player, and they had to have her run the point guard just because of just the lack of players and talent and things like that. So I think it's a much better outlook for them this year.
Yeah, I think that the one thing I take out of all this is Josie's going to be allowed to be Josie.
Mm-hmm.
She's tough. She's tough inside. I mean, I really have always thought she was a really good player. But when you start talking to other coaches, whether it's after the game or before the game, and the first name they bring up, is Josie Cross, then she's a heck of a player, and she's really good around the block. She's really good in the paint, and she just had to do some things that just weren't. She wasn't really that comfortable with last year, and now she can be herself. And Danya Burton she's going to create nightmares for people because she is an absolute gazelle. I mean, she absolutely can run up and down the floor and never get tired. And somebody's bigs are going to have to chase her. And good luck. That's not going to work. And I know when they had the Walton girl there, that's a lot of what they did with her. She would run out and they would, have a big chase her, and she would score a lot around the basket. So, I think Danya's going to create a lot of headaches for people. And we know, Abby can distribute the basketball. Is a really good ball handler, but she can shoot really well too. And Maya is just like, you talk about the Energizer Bunny. I mean, that girl just runs nonstop. That's why she's such a good soccer player. And, her speed is deceptive. She's really fast. So, another good asset there, as far as being a defensive standout. And one good thing about the young kids coming in now, they don't have to be superstars immediately. They can kind of fit in and kind of get in the flow. And I think that makes them better too.
Yeah, no, I agree. And like I said, I think it's a very positive outlook for them to really be in that situation. Just so long as everything they play together and they do well, I think they have a chance to be really good and make some noise, especially with the length that they have. So
exactly.
We'll see. You got any final thoughts before we wrap this thing up? Anything on football season or anything?
No, just congratulations to the kids that made the playoffs, and congratulations to the one that that made the semifinals. That's impressive. And, congratulations to the Shady Golf Team, the Greenbrier West Volleyball Team for state titles. Overall, a good year for our area.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think sometimes we tend to focus, at least I do, more so on, football success. But like you said, outside of football, 3 state champions, that's pretty remarkable. That's a great start to the year for the area and the talent and the kids that we have around here. So, well, that's all we got for today. For my co-host, Rusty Udy, I'm Tyler Jackson. We give a shout-out to our editor and producer, Austin Sims, as well. We'll be back next week. We'll preview some of the boys' action and recap some of the girls' action from the last week, and then we'll see you then.